So we're going to talk about the government spending effects of the economy and the tax cuts effects on the economy. And in order to understand this question, we have to understand the multiplier effect. Multiplier effect is a concept that basically describes how increase in one activity in economics will lead to an increase in other areas of economy. And the effect will be not proportional to the original increase, but higher than that. So according to Keynes, increase in government expenditure will lead to a much greater increase in GDP. So maybe if GDP, if the government spends $1, the GDP will grow $1.50, or something like that. In a similar manner, tax cuts should lead to an increase in GDP. And we're going to test this hypothesis out. So here we have a graph that shows government expenditure increase or decrease, which is represented by the blue line. We're talking about the United Kingdom here. And we have data from 2001 to 2012. So we can see that, and the red line is the growth in GDP, and these are all absolute values. So we can see that the blue line is consistently lower than the red line, which means that the GDP grew at a greater rate on average than the government spent money. However, we do see some outliers over here. So from 2008 to 2010, this theory doesn't apply because of the crisis, which is understandable, I think. And on the second graph, we can see the tax revenues for the United Kingdom. And we can also see that basically the tax revenues didn't change that much on the absolute scale, but when they increase, the government expenditure goes down a little bit.
In the same way, here we have a graph from the US. In the graph above, we can see both in blue the government expenditure and in red the GDP growth in percentage values. So here we can see again that there is a big difference and a lapse of time in which we don't apply this multiplier effect of Keynes that is during the crisis between 2007 and 2010. Apart from that, we have a period in which doesn't apply that much, but in which we can say that it could be applicable. That is between 2001 and 2007. Below, we have a tax revenue graph that shows how the taxes were collected in this country during the last 12 years.
So now we want to see if this effect works in Japan, as we want to try the hypothesis in a global way, so one country from America, one from Asia, and one from Europe. If we compare the GDP to government expenditure, starting in 2001, we can see that government expenditure has been decreasing slowly, while GDP was still increasing, so the effect didn't take place. Then we had the crisis, which made the results irrelevant from 2007 to 2008. And after that, we can see that small increases in government expenditure until 2012 have been reflected in the GDP. So by the end of this year, it made sense. Concerning the tax revenues, well, whenever it has been decreasing, we can see that the GDP as well has been decreasing in that period, especially during the crisis, and that made more sense than with the government expenditure. After that, we can see that an increase in tax revenues has been leading to an increase in GDP as well, so that is a bit contradictory with our hypothesis.
The expenditure multiplier. According to Keynesian theory, and according to Obama's stimulus package, they estimated that $1 of government expenditure would lead to $1.57 increase in the GDP. It is, as we consider, the best way to stimulate the economy in the short run, but in the long run doesn't make the same effect due to the fact that in the long run, after moving the aggregate demand, we won't have an increase in the output, but only in the prices. It will lead to inflation, but not to a GDP growth. There are three kinds of government spending that stimulates the economy. First, public works projects. Second, financial aid to local governments. And the third and last place, unemployment benefits.
Then we can consider the effect that bring this tax multiplier. So first we have from studies in the US that a $1 tax cut brings only $0.99 more to the GDP. So we can say that the most successful economic stimulus in the long run, however, comes from tax cut and not from government expenditure. This government taxation depends on the level of consumption, like how firms and households consume at what level, and also it depends on anticipating the future tax increases so that you can apply these tax cuts depending on the future and not only on the actual tax rate. Also, and it's a positive point, it has no crowding effect. That means that for the government expenditure, whenever you increase it, it partially displaces the expenditures by households and firms. It lowers them, and this is a negative effect brought by the government spending, and that is not applicable to the tax multiplier.
Alright, so in conclusion, we're gonna look at both policies once again, and we can clearly see that both of them are very important. But over time, the government expenditure program doesn't work. So in the long run, it's not efficient, and we can see that increasing government spending will have a negative effect on private investment spending in the long run. So fiscal multipliers are much weaker in the short run, but they provide a much better results in the long run. And also, we have to understand the differences between different countries. And from the research we've done, we can conclude that in countries with lower income or flexible exchange rates, where the inflation is relatively high and the exchange rates are not stable, the fiscal multipliers don't work as well.